Time again for another installment of The Basics, and this episode is due to a request by one of my viewers who wants to know deck composition for a tournament caliber deck. So, using my Federation deck as an example, I'm going to show you what is the makeup of this deck and how you can use it as a template for your own when you're building one. So just to keep in mind, this is meant as a rough guideline. Every player is different, but this is what my Federation deck is composed of and why it is this way. Starting with missions, minimum 6 missions and 1 outpost. Because of the way I've set this deck up, I only need 1 outpost, whereas other affiliations I'd have at least 2 outposts. As it stands right now, I have 20 dilemmas, mainly because I'm just playing solitaire with it. If I were to go to a tournament, I would add 5 or 6 more dilemmas. That way I have plenty to seed under my opponent's missions. I have 20 personnel, which is more than enough for a deck of this type. And also not pictured, I have 2 additional personnel in my Q's Tent side deck that I can bring out at any time. The reason for 20 is I want to have at least 6 or 7 personnel on each ship, whereas I have 3 ships in this deck. And also not pictured, I have a runabout sitting in my Q's Tent in case I need it. Events, interrupts, and a couple artifacts. These total about 24. There are also duplicates and additional events and interrupts in my Q's Tent, but for my main draw deck on this deck, there's 24. I do add to that sometimes because I will test it out in a solitaire game and find that I need more, or in games I've played with other people. Right now, I only have 3 equipment cards in my draw deck. I do have 2 more in my Q's Tent, but I'm not big on personnel battles with this deck. I have it set up with enough personnel that I could, and I do carry additional equipment in the Q's Tent, but in this case, 2 rifles and an engineering kit. I probably will have to double that at some point because extra equipment does come in handy. And the Q's Tent, I have 13 different cards, which is the limit for the Q's Tent side deck, comprising of artifacts, events, interrupts, those 2 extra personnel I mentioned, as well as the runabout, and a couple surprises for my opponents, should they really piss me off enough to bring them out. Now, that being said, no 2 decks are the same. My other decks are set up differently. Some have more cards, some have less. But in terms of the Federation deck, I've set it up this way because it's meant to play a certain way, especially with the types of cards and the amount of those cards I've put in this deck as well as in the Q's Tent. Again, this is a rough guideline. You don't have to make it exactly the way I've done it, but I find that this works for me and it works for the type of Federation deck that I've put together. It is a power deck. It is meant to score points and do some bad stuff to opponents at the same time. It's not big on away team battles, mind you, but otherwise it's a power deck. Have a great day, everybody.